Hello. Hi. Good evening, everybody. Evening time? Afternoon, I guess. My name is Nora O'Murchú. I am a curator and writer, and I'm a researcher actually based in Ireland. I suspect that I was invited here because of my current research, which very much kind of focuses on how images seemingly become a site of governance for how contemporary power functions today. And for me, kind of images kind of have become kind of one of the primary ways by which we seemingly try to organize reality, especially around kind of like the rhythms of mood and atmosphere and affect. So first I want to begin by thanking Luis and his amazing team who have hosted us over like the last few days. So we're very, very appreciative and very grateful to be here. Love Portugal. It's a good time, great food. Warmly recommend. So it's a real pleasure for me to introduce someone who I think anybody with an interest in media art, network culture, or technical systems should already know. So I don't only want to start by actually reading out your formal bio, because I think everybody knows who you are, which I think is very fair enough. But instead of doing this, I actually wanted to roll out my tiny little story about you. So you might not remember from...
Uh-oh.
No, it's fine.
What did I do?
It's totally fine. But I remember as like a very, very young student, actually with I started out in engineering, and I was very into open source culture, and I first discovered it. And I remember reading your book, A Hacker Manifesto, which is one of the primary texts for the beginning of my relatively naive journey into media art, basically. But I remember emailing you and actually asking you if I could translate your book into Irish. And you actually just wrote back, which is very surprising for me, a very naive student, because I did not think somebody so famous and so prestigious as yourself would take the time to email me back about an Irish translation, but you did, and it's on a hard drive somewhere if you ever want to read it. So
I might, in fact.
Yes, but that stayed for me. That moment actually really stayed for me for a really long time. It's a great I don't know, for me it's just a kind of an attribute of your characteristic about your ability to always be open and to share, to always bypass kind of the boundaries and the restrictions around kind of whose information is for who. So I really appreciate that. So over the past 2 decades, McKenzie Wark has been fundamental in helping us think through the materialities of computation, infrastructure, and technical power. But more importantly, for me, the work is also consistently engaged with the effective embodied conditions that these systems produce. How these systems not only shape economies and governance, but also perception, desire, intimacy, social relations, and culture itself. Across her books, such as A Hacker Manifesto, Gamer Theory, Capital is Dead, Raving, Reverse Cowboy, she's continuously pushed us to think structurally about the world we're living through, not only in terms of labor, infrastructure, and power, but also through the effective conditions that these contemporary systems produce. And her work moves fluidly between political economy, media theory, subculture, intimacy, and everyday life, insisting that these systems are lived materially through bodies, perception, desire, and our social relations. And I think that's exactly what tonight's conversation will open onto, how power mutates through platforms, infrastructures, systems, and the technical forms of governance that increasingly mediate the conditions of social life itself. And so please join me welcoming McKenzie Wark.
Thank you, Nora.
I'm going to go off stage.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, good to sit here. I think my family lost the ability to speak Irish 250 years ago, but I appreciate that you would want to do that. All right, my slides are up. I will talk a little bit about Hacker Manifesto. It just got translated into Portuguese, but then sold out. But Centésima Página, is that the name of the bookstore? Has a few copies of it just a couple of blocks away. I'll talk mostly about Capital is Dead, Is There Something Worse? Which here, the good news is that's in Portuguese, the bad news is in Brazil. It hasn't come out here. And I'll talk a little bit about Raving, just published by Orfeo Negro here in Portugal. So yeah, what if it isn't capitalism, but it's worse? Like that's sort of the motivating question in a sense. To back it up to how do we write critical theory in the present, and I really want to stress starting with observation of the present before you go to the archive, rather than always reading the book first and then, books from the past and then interpreting the present as if it was a variation on the past. Let's do it the other way around. So that's the first methodological note. And I'm interested in the work and play of the concept. How do we grasp the world not just through our affective and perceptual response to it, but at the level of the concept? The reason is that while a good fact is mostly true about something in particular, good concepts are slightly true, but about a lot of things. It's a way of trying to grab hold of history and the totality and not always being, stuck with only the particulars. Particulars matter, but what's the synthesis? And then to think about concepts as potentially actionable abstractions. How, once we've grasped something about the world, does that orient our action into it? So that's critical theory, right? At least how I understand it. But then this then becomes the question, rather than simply assuming that what we are living in as at its most current top domain level is capitalism, what if it actually isn't anymore and it's something worse? And how would we think about that? So it's an idea I've been working on since Hacker Manifesto, which is actually now 25 years old as a text. Some of it no longer works. The thing about a good theory is it should be testable, and if the world doesn't add up to it, then you have to revise the theory. But some of it, I think, does. And part of that's got to do with it coming out of our context. Like, I didn't write this in the academy. I wrote it by being involved in the sort of media avant-garde movement around what do we do with the internet at this moment when no one had figured out what the business model for it was. So it was a space that was free. And we really tried to build a different kind of digital culture. We lost. We failed. That project didn't happen, and we have something much worse. But there was a moment where it seemed like we could have a different kind of relation to media techniques. So this work was very much based on participant observation in a world that was trying to build something other than where we ended up. All right, so then we got to do a little theory on this, and you might think, all right, it's going to be some Marx. Marx is still my go-to guy, and we often think of Marx as a theorist of capitalism. Actually, he isn't. He's the theorist of modes of production, of which capitalism is one. And I think this is absolutely fundamental intervention in how we use that body of work. Once you've looked at the world, then you go looking for a theory. Oh, let's just read Capital, because it's no, well, what if it isn't Capital? Well, let's go back to a thing Marx wrote before that, a contribution to a critique of political economy, which asks the prior question, what's a mode of production, of which capitalism will then be an example. And I got to read his little methodological note, because to me this is everything. Yes, I'm still a vulgar Marxist. In the social production of their existence, humans inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will, namely relations of production, appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic infrastructure of society, the real foundation, on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and cultural, to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material conditions, of material life, conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It's not the consciousness of men, of humans, that determines our existence, but our social existence that determines our consciousness. Important methodological point. At a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production, or with the property relations within the framework of which they have operated hitherto. From forms of development of the productive forces, those relations turn into their fetters. Then begins an era of social revolution. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to a transformation of the whole immense superstructure. So, to me, I just think that's still a good methodological starting point for trying to figure out what the fuck is this. And it's kind of like a vulgar Marxist way of going about it, because the economic stuff comes first and everything else is derivative and secondary to that. And I think we're actually living through a moment like this, where the productive forces are pushing against political, legal, social infrastructures and bursting through them. But it just isn't the revolution anybody anticipated. It's worse. And so how do we understand that particular moment? So as I mentioned, Marx is a theorist of modes of production, and there's sort of four that he knew about in his time. The ancient world of slavery, he was aware of the modern form in the Americas, but didn't actually fully develop a theory of it. But he was interested in the succession from ancient world slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and the idea was that would be superseded by the development of the revolution. Communism comes after that. But what if that's not the path history took and we ended up somewhere else? I think that's the question we have to ask. Side note, he did have this idea that there was this other thing, the Asiatic mode of production, China. He didn't really understand it because there really wasn't much he could read about it or study about it. But any history of political economy that doesn't center China is not going to explain 2026, right? Because world history now revolves around whatever happens in China, yeah? If you were to go back 20, 30 years in a time machine and tell everybody that the fate of the global market economy depends on the Chinese Communist Party, they would have thought you were nuts. But that's where we've ended up, yeah? A bunch of Leninists are going to decide, essentially, what happens. Now, there was the Red Decade of the 60s into the 70s, which is a revolution that did not happen in France in 68. The other slide is Portugal's own Carnation Revolution, which obviously changed some things, but we still had capitalism after it. Yeah, like that didn't go away. We were still there. So here I want to bring in a little Pier Paolo Pasolini, who was a filmmaker, a poet, a novelist, a journalist, and it's like, could you have left something for someone else? No, he did it all. He was also a super interesting theorist, and that he was engaged in the entire media sphere of his time is relevant. Like, he had a practice that helped him see it. And key point of how he thought about he called it neo-capitalism of the 1960s, is that he thought that the external revolution to transform capitalism in a socialist direction had failed. Like, we tried it, it didn't work, we failed, we lost. What had happened instead was an internal revolution by which capitalism had revolutionized itself to become something else. You're not the only person to have that idea. So what if that's the case? What if one looked back on the preceding history of revolutions and thought they're actually one ruling class overturning another, in which subordinate classes play a subsidiary role? So what if there was a revolution in and against capitalism which ended up giving us a different kind of ruling class at the top domain, even if most of what we live in still feels like capitalism on an everyday level, but there's something more powerful than it and above it. So that's the thesis of this book. So modes of production are always multiple, mutually dependent, interlocking, and in relations of subordination and domination. That's not new. It's never just been capitalism anyway. If you were to read, nearly all of the classic Marxist texts or Marxist writers of the late 19th, early 20th century, one of their central preoccupations is the peasant question, because the landlord system is a whole different other mode of production. So what is a worker-peasant alliance? Because they're different classes. It isn't just capitalism. The question then is, what's the dominant mode, and could there be an emerging one over and above capitalism? I did not make this diagram. I have terrible design skills. Someone made this and I've copied it. I think their name's in the bottom there somewhere. So it's to turn that history into a diagram. Three successive subordinate classes: farmer, worker, what I called hacker class, call it what you like. three dominant ruling classes, landlord capitalists, and what I've called vectoralist class, and I'll get to why I called them that. So that's, if you like, the simplified diagram of history from a somewhat Eurocentric perspective. So what if not capital but vector is the concept for designating what now dominates? It's actually not about the ownership of the means of production. Apple didn't make my phone, yeah? Like, Apple controls the production process by controlling the intellectual property, the design process, the information that's extractable from the phone, the supply chain logistics. They don't make the phone, but somehow they're one of the biggest corporations in the world. How do you do that? How do you become a massive, globally dominant corporation without making the thing? Is, I think, a question to ask. So can you control the value chain through an information infrastructure? I think the answer is yes. I chose the word vector, which its simplest meaning is a line of fixed length, but any position. So that's what this world is. It's controllable by vector. You can connect almost any point to any other point as a means of surveillance and control. And how did that become a generalized means of value extraction? Where vector includes not just lines, but also stocks and flows of information along it. And then maybe what emerges out of that is, to borrow and slightly misuse a term from the world of finance, control through the derivative. So information about information becomes the means of controlling that flow of information, which then controls flows of the production of material things, which controls the extraction of primary produce from the earth. That's the basic diagram. And on top of it sits an emergent, or now maybe emerged, ruling class. I called it the vectoralist class. Which, not uniquely, but in a super curious way, is able to extract a derivative from both labour and non-labour. You are working for somebody else when you just walk around with a phone in your pocket, because it's creating telemetry that a whole bunch of other companies have access to and will build business plans around, and will also target marketing to you based on that information that you just gave them for free. Yeah? So not the first time non-labour has been key to a mode of production. Classic capitalism required unpaid women's labour in the household. But now everybody is implicated in the extraction of non-labour when you use any interface or device. With it comes a second wave of proletarianisation. After the proletarianisation of the direct producer, the proletarianisation of us as information workers is the thing that we are living through the surveillance of our labour, the measurement of every single output that we produce, the standardization of those outputs, and then extraction of derivatives that control that as a value chain. So the thing about capitalism was that it generated this massive information overhead of management and marketing, and an entire class trained in universities did that work and formed a middle class. The proletarianizing of that class is the moment that we're moving through. So it's driven by forces of production, changing relations of production, but it also changes the superstructures. You may be familiar with Theodor Adorno's critiques of the culture industry. I now have fond, loving memories of how great the culture industry was, because we don't have it. That's not where mediatized art is coming from. It's what I call a vulture industry that has an extractive relationship. You know, it's streaming media, and you think that means it streams to you, but also you are streaming information to it. Like, every interface is then also is also extractive. We may be living through a moment of the transformation of the state. I have a particular perspective on that living in the United States. I may have always wanted to see the fall of the American empire in my lifetime. I did not anticipate living in it while it happened. But that's where we are. And with that, the destabilization of the entire post-war consensus order, which, whatever your critiques of it, and I have many, what seems to be replacing it looks like it's worse. Yeah, so it's not to justify what was, but to kind of go, you all have to do NATO on your own now. The United States is sort of not part of it. And they just started a war. If the war was to create volatility for the benefit of the financialization of fossil fuels, that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I almost believe it. Because the thing about financialization is it feeds on volatility rather than stable trading conditions that capitalism used to require. And guess what we just got? Massive instability, volatility. As I mentioned, we're living through an automation of intellectual labor. I'm always going to refer to it as so-called AI because it's not artificial intelligence. It's not intelligence. Artificial intelligence was a marketing term created to get federal grants out of the American government half a century ago. That's not what it is, yeah? What we're looking at is large language models based on the privatization of an information commons that all of us contributed to over centuries, but particularly over recent decades. So that's an additional step after the development of a kind of digital surveillance infrastructure is then the automation of the production of more and more forms of output. Now, it seems pretty clear to me that the massive investment in data centers, shoving AI into every single interface it could possibly be in it, is only partly a business model. There may be a crash and a shakeout, but it's still going to be around even after that. I see it more as a political, ideological movement, yeah? A lot of these companies are not making money and there's no money to be made on the horizon. But ooh, what if this wasn't just a business plan, but there's a different dimension to it? I'm starting to sound paranoid. I don't know. There could be a lot of muddle through with this as well, clearly, but it's like, it's worse, whatever it is. It's bad. And it makes us the passenger in history, yeah? It makes us the passenger in our own lives. It feels like you have agency because of the phone. The phone also means your boss can call you anywhere, anytime, and get you to do something. I remember the good old days when I had office jobs and you'd leave at 5 in the afternoon and go home and they had no way of contacting you, yeah? You're just like, oh, what, that problem will have to wait till I clock into work Monday morning. Not anymore. Yeah, it's like the midnight text. It's like, you gotta fix this thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, you know. My former roommate used to go to the rave with 2 phones, one in the backpack and one in the belly pack, and that was the work one. If that vibrated, she was on call to fix the internet. Yeah, because she worked for a company that did internet infrastructure. And it's like, I wonder if anybody knows that the fate of some huge chunk of the internet is in the hands of this 28-year-old transgender raver stoner who's just going to go fix that problem right now, you know? So that labor's not going to get automated, but a lot of other labor is. So the phone is an extractive device. It looks like it gives you things, but it takes. And there is an asymmetry in that flow of information. You get a little bit, the owners of those vectors get all of it. The interface still has residues of skeuomorph in it. I won't get into this. It's in my next book's Passenger, and there's more of it in that. Every single icon on there is not the thing that it's pretending to be, yeah? All of those are pictures of things that it no longer is and is pretending to be. So there's a way in which by making the interface look like it still does the thing you're familiar with, it quietly and gradually becomes something else. And the other thesis of that book is that there is no writing anymore at all. No one writes. It is texting, and that is a two-way relationship with the screen that is reading you at the same time that you read it, or it is writing you at the same time that you write it. So from writing to texting. And I won't go into this, but maybe it's a double form of value affecting information in the same way that use value and exchange value affected the good and turned it into the commodity. So whatever sense value you're getting from the screen is generating sign value at the same time, which is quantifiable and for somebody else. So what the fuck do we do about any of that? And that's where thinking in terms of class alliance, of not letting this divide us by race, gender, and sexuality, obviously, but to think also how to combine people of different classes together. Have we heard of Soren Mandami, who's now the mayor of my city. We elected a left-wing mayor, but the reason we were able to do it was to put together an alliance of downwardly mobile information workers with manual workers and service workers as well, and to not let them divide us. Like, those of us who work with information are often treated as if we're some privileged strata, and in many ways we are, but then also paying the same ridiculously high rents and surveilled in the same way and dealing with the cops in the same way. So to think through class alliance, where you have to actually specify the differences between people's experiences before you can put those kind of alliances back together again. In terms of practices around information work, I've always been interested in collective formations, and they've ended up oscillating between my interest in subcultures, social movements, bohemias, and avant-gardes. And I can't quite tell the difference between them sometimes. They seem to flow into each other, but how do we collectively organise in ways that are a little different to the union or the party? Those still have their place, but sometimes we do things differently. I literally drew this morning, so I'm sorry, it's like I have no design skills. It fits on a semiotic square. In a way that, bohemias and subcultures are sort of residual forms of social organisation. Avant-gardes and social movements are always sort of pushing forwards. Bohemias and avant-gardes are sort of restricted in terms of who belongs to them. Subcultures and social movements are popular forms of organisation. So, how do we organise ourselves as information workers in everyday life such that if you want to try and get off your phone altogether, good luck with that, but you basically need it to interface with the world. That's how much our autonomy has been taken away. But how do we organise in such a way that we use the phone to get off it and organise our lives and our relation to techniques differently? So I won't go through all of this, but thinking through these four inherited forms of social, political, technical organisation of people who work with information and culture, and how do we reformulate those for the era of the 21st century and what's actually a new mode of production. And I'll just sort of pick out one. I love the avant-gardes were like my education. I loved kind of like Dada and the surrealists, but it's like, also there were the futurists, and they were kind of fascist, like it's a dangerous, acceleration is kind of dangerous, wanting to be in advance of the main force of the army of the transformation of culture also has its dangers, So to stick with and also I'm a little wary of the militarized metaphor, but what if rather than be the avant-garde, we were deserters? How do you desert from the militarization of everyday life, of the pure war, as Virilio called it, that we've now ended up in? And how do you desert without making it obvious you've done that, which attracts more surveillance? You leave up the decoy. Make it look like you're still there on Instagram, but you're not. How to be present but completely detached from it, so that we are producing a different relation to culture in a different place, which is why I wrote this book, Raving, because one thing about a good rave is that hundreds of people will be together using a Technics, which is the sound system and the lights and all that, and no one will look at their phone for hours. There's no need to. Like, we're doing something better. We're doing something more interesting together. What are the things that are more interesting to do together that are less extractive becomes the front line in thinking about what to do with this. So, to me, the Marxist tradition is sort of living open one, but you have to go back to the first principles of it rather than think, it's capitalism, I'll just put a modifier in front of it, It's like neoliberal capitalism. So it's a word with a modifier, No, this is just bad poetry. Maybe it's something else, and maybe it's something worse, Some of my friends and colleagues are calling it techno-feudalism. They haven't read a single book about feudalism. It's not feudal. In feudalism, the peasants controlled their tools, and they controlled the temporal cycle of the day. It's not feudal at all. Let's, rather than, it looks like capitalism, but it's a little different. No, it's not. It looks like, no. Let's rethink the language to describe it from first principles rather than just modify it a little bit, Because if history really is changing that much, it puts pressure on language, and we need a new language to describe it. I'm not saying it has to be my language. but to make working with language one of the arts of figuring out where we are, rather than just adding and subtracting a little bit from it. Like that, I think really is the main thing. And we've got to learn from when we lost, yeah? There's a series of defeats of social movements in the 20th and early 21st centuries. Let's learn from those defeats rather than try to repeat what they did. Let's make a theory and practice in the present and of the present, because I think the present is the hardest thing to write about, or make art about, or make music about. You're often too dependent on the past or projecting too far into a future, and the present's the missing moment. Like the language of the present's difficult, and we have to acknowledge that. But how do we produce different concepts and different practices that will help us orient ourselves now, and making the play with that language a collective project that will help orient us? That's what I've been trying to do for 25 years. And that's all I got. Thank you. Hi, Nora.
I'm back. I also just wanted to say that I too also anticipated the collapse of the US political order, the political state, but didn't anticipate living through a platform-mediated version of that imported into Ireland.
Yeah.
That's fun.
You see, the French government finally got religion on Linux.
Oh.
You know, some people have been saying for years, like, you need sovereignty over your platforms. And everyone's
yes.
like, this is a fringe idea. And now the French government is like, oh, fuck, everything runs on Microsoft.
But you know what they're doing this through? Through Lidl.
Oh, God.
Yeah, but so apparently Lidl, actually I learned this morning when I was like doom scrolling actually, but I learned this morning where basically through TikTok or through Instagram, one of these things, where actually like Lidl went to AWS, Amazon's services, to basically say like, oh hey, we need help with organizing our customer database and we need these types of services. And Amazon said like, oh yes, we can help you do that, but we don't have any way of actually like restricting kind of like US state access to that data. And Lidl basically said, oh, no, thank you, and then developed their own system. So now basically...
That's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah, and this is very interesting. I mean, like, okay, so there's a lot we can talk about. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. Yeah.
But
Example.
I don't really know where I want to start because, but I think maybe I want to start with the question of... maybe this idea of, first of all, this idea of like maybe cosmotechnics. I think this is kind of coming through, the idea of imagining kind of like a different technical order. And I think really what we're kind of like living through maybe now is kind of maybe the Silicon Valley version of cosmotechnics playing out to its most maximum, right? So we have kind of like unfortunately, like Europe and America are very closely interwoven and tied. There's a long kind of form of like shared history. Especially like living in Ireland, I think that we feel that very differently maybe towards the continent. There's like, we have like a lot of like strong like US-Irish relations that were actually very anti-colonial. Unfortunately, that has somehow changed somewhere. Can't pinpoint exactly where, but it did change somewhere. But I think that really like Ireland being like a tax haven and a great place for American companies to exist in, we have kind of like been living with this idea of kind of like the US cosmotechnic or the Silicon Valley version of the cosmotechnic. I guess what I wanted to ask you to kind of maybe unpack, first of all, kind of who you see that vectorial class being and like what type of kind of cosmotechnic that you feel is kind of inherent to what the vectorial class maybe produces.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't use the term cosmotechnics.
Okay,
we don't need to get into the weeds of the philosophical argument around that. But and the thing is, like the obvious sort of consumer-facing piece of vectorless class is the things you're interacting with every day that you know about, which is sort of Apple and Amazon and Microsoft and Google. You're also interacting with Salesforce, whether you know it or not, which tends not to be consumer-facing, but a lot of workplace software products are them. So there's that, and then Cloudflare and a whole bunch of other companies underneath that run levels of infrastructure, digital infrastructure under it. So there's parts of it that are consumer-facing and parts of it that are not. But it's also the dominant part of every industry. It looks like Tesla makes cars, but the car's also a computer that's an extractive device that gathers data through movement rather than stasis. It's kind of like evil genius business plan, right? And when you then become dependent on the information control that then runs that particular vehicle that you're using, right? But then you might think, what about the companies that make the food? Well, often they don't directly do that. They're in the business of branding, and they're in the business of developing genetically modified organisms. They're in the business of food logistics. So that is all where that is now. You might think, what about real estate? Like many of us have landlords. I mentioned the rents are too damn high, right? And rent works a little different to profit. There's already two different modes of production there. But in the United States, and I imagine here, above and beyond the immediate landlord, often you've got property trusts where enormous chunks of property are now essentially portfolios of information about where property is, which then become an asset that you can build financial instruments on top of, yeah? So everything's getting controlled at that level, which then controls this level, which controls that level, which is where you are, yeah? So that would be to give sort of a little bit of the diagram of how that works.
No, I mean, that's very helpful. And I do think that kind of like that informational infrastructure is something that is so hard to grasp because in lots of ways it's so invisible in some ways. And I think kind of like making that infrastructure visible is kind of like a large part also of regaining agency around this. Before we go into that part of the conversation though, I also maybe wanted to ask you about kind of like at the interface level. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have kind of like a theory where I'm interested as well in the fact that the informational layer is also at the interface. The idea of kind of controlling image, content, information, sound clips at that layer. And this is where for me, the vectorial class kind of becomes even broader in some way. That it's not just at the level of company or technical, but also at maybe a kind of like the more nefarious, anti-state or a person who is kind of like more, in Ireland, for example, we have a lot of people who are engaged in kind of like alt-right politics, and they very much kind of exist as an informational layer, which they use kind of like branding, AI slop, any kind of tactic to kind of like create kind of a informational warfare or a culture war basically at that layer. I'm just wondering maybe if you think a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think I have a US-centered perspective on this, and it might play out differently here or Ireland, but there's like a really noticeable change in the space of political compromise that dominated state politics in Europe or the United States since the post-war settlement. In most countries there were a handful of major parties and power switched around between them. And you'd be like, did the Conservatives win or the Social Democrats win? It was one or the other. Sometimes it's coalition-based. Much of that order sort of fell away in the last 10 years or so, yeah. And we're watching the suicide of the British Labour Party right now, yeah? But it's like Keir Starmer's going to land on the board of some fucking company or doing consultancy like Tony Blair did. So the leaders of the party don't care about it, And it's like you're destroying, the Anglophone world's biggest, oldest labour movement to become a consultant, Like it just, as much as one might have issues with British Labour, like to see it end like that, breaks my fucking heart. But at the ideological level, propaganda is sort of a little detectable sometimes in content, but how is it invisible as form? And is what we're interacting with propaganda at the level of form. Yeah. I travel a lot, and Instagram must know that about me. And the thing it wants to show me is people behaving badly on aircraft and being filmed by other people. And the thing about flying on a plane. It's like, yeah, you know, maybe some people are kind of jerks, but there's like a sort of social compact where we all just ignore each other and get where we're going. And so I'm suddenly being shown instances where that didn't happen, which I think are actually, they've increased, but it's still pretty rare. Most people say, yeah, you get on the plane, you just ignore everybody, you get off at the other end, fine. You know, what Sartre called seriality actually working for us. The flight before last window seat was what I took to be a Muslim woman who was observant and who was black. Middle seat was an Orthodox Jewish man. It's rather large and took up a little bit of my space, but I just dealt with it. And on the end, white transsexual woman. And we all just ignored each other, except when we had to go to the bathroom, and then we just negotiated the language of the body between the three of us, and the incompatibilities or alignments of our worldviews are irrelevant. So, but now I've got, you know, all of my devices telling me, you're on your own, it's all against all. I'm like, wait a minute, you know, and it's coming through something that isn't obviously political.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah.
It is. Like, why show me that? So to think through at the level of infrastructure and form, how is a different matrix of worldviews being propagated?
But this is such like for me, this is kind of like one of the most kind of contemporary issues that we're kind of dealing with, especially in relation to questions of power. Like now we have kind of like reality being written for us through content, basically, or like a perceived type of reality that people would also like to imagine. Like, I mean, I don't know how it is. I mean, for sure. Also, I experienced like kind of like a noticeable change in types of content that I would receive. Like somehow, for some reason, I am receiving more MMA fighter content. No matter how much I say, no thank you, this is what I get constantly. Like before it was cats. So I guess there is like a line.
Give me the cats again.
Yeah, there is a line, I know. I also get like this AI cat slop drama with like, you know, there's like this trend in China at the moment where there's like this AI slop that are like, they're ninja fighters. I do enjoy this, but I can see how maybe eventually this does connect to other
and first thing to notice, social media isn't social anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm on Facebook because of, you know, elderly friends in Australia, but I can't find them through it anymore. You know, like this, and they're all watching this stuff, and it's like, oh, who's turned racist now? You know, like what nonsense are you imbibing?
I mean, everybody has to have hobbies.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'm Irish. I have very dark humor. I have intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
But I think that my question is that kind of like how content has become this kind of surface that like something that like that all of a sudden that something that is imagined and not actually statistically factually real or not statistically factually true, but yet has become a type of imagined truth that actually easily circulates, easily becomes believable, and becomes parroted as kind of a narrative.
I mean, there was an attempt at some sort of information ecology, particularly in the post-war era. I have so many disagreements with Jürgen Habermas, who just passed, but that was the whole project, is like what would be a theory of communicative action, where decisions are based on rational debate that is enforced. To do that, you need a public sphere, where, you know, newspapers operate with some constraint as to what the range of opinion is, and there is some attention to fact-checking. You need universities to be able to research these things with some level of independence. You need a state apparatus where the state is the guarantor of the referent. If you say X is X, there is a state agency somewhere. This is what Brexit was all about, how annoying it was that the EU would be saying, chocolate's got to be motherfucking chocolate.
Yeah, imagine
this Cadbury
that.
stuff is bullshit. It's not, you can't call it that because it's fake. And it, you know, and it's like, well, thank God, you know, you get the European stuff, at least you know that's what it is. So state is guarantor of the referent, that the object is what the sign says, at least minimally. Now, obviously it was all very imperfect and gameable and all that. The thing that's going on, and not just the United States, in Argentina, in Brazil, and the thing to resist is the abolition of the information ecology that at least made the old capitalist world manageable with some tenuous contact with reality. So the United States has just basically abolished federal health research funding. abolished the ability to designate what's in various kinds of food and drugs. The top level of the media sphere is being bought out by vectorless class. The Washington Post has run more than one editorial about how lovely billionaires are and why we shouldn't hate them.
Oh my God.
I still motherfucking hate them, but you know. So I'm like, oh, all right. So, but it's not that the old ideological realm was a good one, but it's to note that it's changed and might be worse.
Yeah, I do think it might be worse. I haven't exactly experienced why. But speaking of one of our favorite billionaires, Jeff Bezos, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm sorry. You should not have asked me. My question really is kind of like how maybe they realize also that this fact that, I mean, also as well with the Donald Trump as well, he's very much kind of engaged in this idea of kind of like a narrative rewrite that occurs continuously at the level of interface and almost kind of enforcing a type of kind of reality there as well. And I wonder as well in terms of kind of like how then you see that this is reinforced through kind of like offline events, so kind of how these things kind of bleed together.
Yeah, and for those with this background, I've been doing a bit of a Frankfurt School thing, but to do a bit of a Birmingham School thing, you know, people are not cultural dopes like most Americans have figured out. This is fucking nonsense. This is not what we wanted. How are we sucked into this? But whether the institutions are still robust enough to change course, we won't know until later in the year. We might not have actual elections in the United States in November, you know. That's terrifying. Yeah, because the whole world order is, you know, much as one would not want to be American-centric, it's this massive power and decline. Yeah. So how is there a kind of attempt at a staging of the simulation of democracy in motion? Hungary shows that you can reverse it if the institutions are at least minimally functional. Whether the next version of Hungary is actually much better or not, I don't know. And let me just say, for trans people, there's no sign then it will be. Yeah. You know, but it is possible to reverse course sometimes. But is it possible to get a different kind of compact out of this new emerging ruling class? That's going to take social movements to press for it, because they ain't going to give it to us.
Yeah, but I think this maybe brings us to the next section of kind of what I want to talk to you about, kind of like, where is our agency in these things? Like, I think that clearly we agree that this change is different, and some of this change is good and some of this change is bad, right? I think kind of like the main change...
Mostly bad.
I know, the main change that I would see is that, like, basically, you know, this idea of capital to proceed without any type of ethical constraint, basically, right? And I think that, you know, in lots of ways that we find ourselves kind of like overwhelmed in this kind of scenario where all of a sudden things that we thought should hold rigid don't. For example, like genociding proceeding, like without any type of inhibition whatsoever, or, you know, I don't know, there's so many examples from Trump that we can bring up, but I won't. But I do wonder about kind of like, where do you see kind of like the possibility of agency?
Yeah, and like Trump's a bit of a distraction in the whole thing. And,
yeah.
More a sign of the implosion of a sort of political structure that it could be captured and co-opted like that. You know, a miracle of miracles if the Democrats win the House. Like, it might not change much because the same people own both parties and have done for years. The difference is which subordinate classes do they have compacts with. You know, like Gramsci's hegemony applies, you know, like they can't rule on their own. Who do they form coalitions with? Yeah. So, yeah, I wouldn't put too much stock by a change in government changing very much at sort of that level. But I want to keep insisting, if it's not capitalism and it's something worse, then the old tools for how you went about it might work but might not. So to sort of think that through a bit, what forms of organisation, and you know, to start small with that, because there's not a lot of optimism you can extract out of the big picture, but the things that you can do in your immediate environment to make it functional are there. The way ordinary people mobilized in Minneapolis, St. Paul against ICE, and a lot of it's done through Signal, which is a reasonably useful tool and probably a little bit more secure, but not completely. So it's like, so people will see it and have some, even in America, some residual sense of the political reflex to a situation or the communal reflex to a situation. So it's like building those ties, including weak ties at the local level, finding the forms of collective activity that are not directly political at all, but just enable people to come together and perceive each other and build trust with each other. I love to go dancing, if I have to go to a demonstration, I want to go with ravers because I don't know these people's names, but I know their bodies, I know how they move. I read their body language. That's who I want to be in a group with if there's cops, you know? Maybe that's not for everybody, but your local gardening group has got knowledge and have developed trust and limits around trust with each other. So to sort of think, there's a pretty big project of intermediating every social relation with techniques.
Yes.
And the social and technical always go together. There's no pure sociality. But where you've got options and agency around the kind of social technical relationship to do that self-consciously and critically. All right, that's the relation to techniques that gives me a little bit more space for being in community, of learning trust and boundaries of trust, of collective production that's not maximally extractive of a way of life. So to sort of head in that direction wherever you can, So it's thinking in the frame of it's kind of worse than we thought. So to not be looking for hope, but looking for what can I actually do
practically.
And I don't do hope. You want an optimist, get somebody else, But I can do joy, Like the dancing is fun. We have pleasure together. We build another time together, and we're off our phones.
Agree. Do you think this points to a type of emergent infrastructural thinking that we can kind of ascribe a type of agency to?
And, given our agency is limited because the depth and complexity of the infrastructure is pretty vast and fragile. And it's probably going to break. It's hard to tell if this ruling class really is in denial about climate change or just wants us to be and is anticipating volatility that's driven by it. It's hard to second guess that. But it's fragile. So, not to be a prepper, you as an individual cannot prep for the destabilization of this infrastructure, but you as a member of groups of people and networks of people who understand each other and work together, that's got, some potential.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I also have a very negative version of this, which is basically, I don't know if if many people follow this, but in Ireland recently, there were these fuel protests that happened. And actually this was one of the very first instances where I thought, okay, I mean, it evolved out of a very, reasonable kind of concerns around kind of cost of living crises. But yet it was very quickly adapted into kind of anti-immigration and was organized by a lot of right-wing agitators. But really why they were so successful is because of their ability, even though they were a very small group, they acted infrastructurally. They blocked roads, they blocked ports, they blocked access to oil, basically. And they basically got the government to give them money directly. So that was
Yeah, and I think there's two tactics to counter. And one is, hierarchies of whose lives are worth more than who else's life, and which includes a segregation of labour, but a segregation of access to social space, and it usually works through racialisation.
Yeah.
It's also going to work through gender, of forcing women out of certain places in work and in social life, but forcing racialised people out. So that's one tactic that you have to counter. The other is scapegoating, which is you pick a minority that is so ridiculously tiny that you can just fuck with them.
Yeah.
That's trans people. That's why It's like we're 1% of the population, and it's like, you know, I'm a rich trans person because I have an actual job. You know, most of my sisters don't have jobs or stable homes, you know, or can't walk down the street. Let's pick on those people, you know. So, and there's almost a sort of like theological dimension to scapegoating. You kind of can't even answer it on a political level. You know, it's like if we take the cursed thing and cast it out, we can restore the version of communal difference that is acceptable and sustainable. So you are like cast out. Scapegoating's in the Old Testament, right, as a device. So you can't really counter that politically, or politically only. Like there's this sort of like theological, mystical dimension to it. And trans people are not the only scapegoat. Disability is another one, you know.
Immigrants.
Well, that's different. Like that's that hierarchy, you know, hierarchical thing about labor. Because immigrants are usually a big group.
The illegal ones.
Well, right, so undocumented. All right, so let's fuck with them. Oh, in America, that's also a huge group, right? So I don't think it's quite scapegoating. It's the segregation device, But to understand how those work, and they work differently in different places.
In Ireland we have these things as well, but like, I mean, trans people are like, I think it's like 0.4% of the population.
No one really knows, and like, thank God people don't collect statistics on us, because like, I'd rather people not know than control us, you know.
This is it, though. I mean, I always think about kind of Sylvia Wynter, and also like her idea of like re-enchantment of the human, and also the idea that like we are more than, you know, to be human is more than just to be like a statistic or a little dot on a graph. I wonder if you have maybe something to add from this perspective, the idea of becoming kind of like a refusal to be illegible to these machines.
And I framed it in terms of desertion and decoy. You know, to make yourself, you can make yourself too ostentatiously invisible, and that will draw more attention. So how do you leave the decoy in place? It's a little bit, Jean Baudrillard turned out to be right about a bunch of stuff, but one of it was like the black hole of the masses, to just be unreadable, has its advantages. So or it's glissant on opacity. What do you learn from colonized people about how not to be legible to the colonizer? That and to resist its desire to want to know you. You know?
I think this is very important as well. I'm going to try to open up to the room just a wee bit. And like if people have like some questions, it'd be good to see kind of some raised hands. But otherwise, we'll continue a little bit of conversation. Okay, none yet. Oh,
any takers? Hi.
Hi.
Someone will come with a mic for you in 4 seconds. Thank you.
At the beginning of the talk, made a joke about China. But what about China in this new world that we are seeing now? Because I think it's a major player, right? And it's a little bit different from the vectorialized structure that you were presenting. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
And. You know, and also I'm from the Asia Pacific, so, you know, I've never really accepted the Atlanticist view of world history. And, you know, the Chinese Revolution brought China back into world history. And boy, is that a complicated, difficult history. But it's now the largest social technical organization that's able to figure out a level of complexity. And its rivals are sort of EU and United States for figuring out complexity at scale. And this is not to defend it. It's an authoritarian state. But to sort of like put it out there that it kind of functions in its own terms. And that the state has retained power in a way that in the United States it hasn't. Like the state's being co-opted by a different kind of ruling class and made completely subordinate to its interests. And China is a little more complicated than that, where there's a merging of political and economic elites in a way the United States didn't do. The United States doesn't do complexity. Anybody been to New York and try to get from the airport to wherever you're going? Like, it's all broken. Like, nothing works.
The roads are the roads have potholes.
But what I think China is a different model of vectorless class, and the project of Belt and Road was the ultimate expression of that. It's like, we have to build an entire not just global material infrastructure, but global information infrastructure to run supply chains that bypass the ones that are already there. And the American EU colonial project is in such a bad odor in Asia and Africa that you can come along and be 2% better than that and sign contracts and establish diplomatic relationships. And even Australia is as tightly bound to American security interests as it is possible to be. But its number one trading partner is China, and you see the very subtle shift and negotiation of interests to where the global ruling order is moving. But I think it's a different social, technical, political organisation of vectoral power. And that's fascinating to me. I don't have the language, so I don't get to study it closely. And I never get invited, and my books are all pirated there. So there's no publisher to get me, but I see it from without as central to where world history is going. And it's, like, who knew? It's basically a Leninist party figured it out, and it's so perversely contrary to the Cold War story that to me has a certain irony. And in Europe and the United States, no one has really got their head around Marxism as a ruling ideology that's successful, but it sort of is there. It's fascinating. I read Xi Jinping, actually, and it's like, damn, it's like commie boilerplate writing, but it actually makes sense. Like, you feel like you're in charge of world history. Like, the Chinese ruling class thinks in world historical terms. The American ruling class does not, and that's terrifying.
They think across time in a very different way.
Yeah, and again, not to justify, because it's a little scary.
But I mean, like, what state is good? Come on.
No, all states bad.
Yeah.
A plague on both their houses. Yeah, no Cold War sides taking. Someone picked up a mic over there? Yeah, hi.
Thank you for this discussion. It's been a long while since I've been in such a vivid and nice exchange. I have a comment, like how this system that is either capitalism or the worst thing that is seems to be assimilating and consuming whatever could have been an opposite to it, like your previous work, the Harkes Manifesto. All this ideology of the open source is being heavily consumed by what is so-called AI now, and maybe this is one of the failures that you mentioned. What can we take out of it? What's the learning there?
Yeah, because the thing is, and this is Gramsci on, hegemony has strategies, counter-hegemony has tactics. It's very hard to put counter-hegemonic practices together. And the tactics that we used 25 years ago no longer work. It looked like we could outflank the old models of property by making information free. It turned out that could be recommodified at a higher level. But I think we can take some credit for pushing a ruling class to figure out a different model. So what they did was all right, so you taught everybody to share information. Let's now build an extractive platform on which you share it. And it's like, damn, we lost. So you have to rethink the tactics, because that worked for a minute, now it doesn't work. We have to go somewhere else. So that's what I'm saying, desertion. But I was involved with people who at the same time were building discrete online archives and anticipated that turn. It's like, we need our own, digital archival resources, and let's build them now before we lose access to all of the critical and creative thinking that matters to us. So I've got hard drives full of it that I freely share. So there's always been a multiplicity of tactics. Some of them we were defeated on. Some pushed the ruling class in directions they really didn't want to go but had to. But yeah, let's rethink where you minimise extractability and surveillance as a sort of tactical priority.
Can I ask, do you think like a return to open source, but in a different way to how it was formulated originally? Do you think like a return to open source now as a way to kind of like build infrastructure, build systems that are maybe like more local? Do you think that as one of the counter tactics? And I ask this because I know there's a lot of artists who are engaged now in building their own tools, and I'm just wondering, is that something that you could maybe talk a little bit about?
Yeah, and you might remember before there was open source, there was free software movement.
Yeah.
Richard Stallman has his issues, not going to get into that right now, but it was sort of like a slightly different model, and open source was the version of it that certain players in the computer industry could see an advantage in. And it was sort of like a compromise formation. So it's like, all right, maybe we go back to something closer to the free software model, but get over some of its, sort of bad habits. Yeah. And maybe it's helpful if tools are interoperative, and it helps if we don't have to keep building the same thing over and over again. And it's a bit of a shame that GitHub also became a site of extraction.
Yeah.
So how else do you figure out how to be discreet, desert, leave the decoy in place? Like that then becomes how you orient yourself to, like what gives us a little bit of autonomy and agency in the present.
Hi. I would like to know, where do you fit violence in your speech? Not violence against or towards people, but towards infrastructure, for example?
It's not a thing I would personally ever participate in. You could basically just push me over. Violence is not my forte. I tend to run away from it. I'm a physical coward. Also, I'm in the United States on a visa, so it's not my lane or my topic. And also, I'm in community with people who are like constantly dealing with sexualized violence and racialized violence. So it's the thing we're trying to find the space that's free from. But it doesn't surprise me that warehouses and distribution centers in the United States just mysteriously caught on fire this year, and one was clearly deliberate, and no one's talking about the other ones. Like it happened more than once. So there's a history of sabotage and machine breaking. Like it wouldn't surprise me if it's coming back. I personally have nothing to do with that dimension of how workers might choose to resist, but kick it over, set it on fire is the last available tactic to people when they have nothing else, and I just think we're going to see more of it.
Thank you.
If I'm being listened to, it's not an advocacy or justification, it's a social science observation. There's just going to be more of that.
Sorry.
Hi.
What do you think about distortion or like creating noise? I mean, to mislead the extractivism. Would that work? Is it possible to do that in a broader way?
I think, I was involved in, sort of media avant-gardes that used that as a tactic a lot. From the late 70s, early 80s. I think it got co-opted, and I think the right does noise. And it's actually creating silence is sort of like, can we create some silence, or create like some minimal order? It's why I love dancing to techno. There's usually no words at all and incredibly repetitive beats. And it's like, to me, it's silence, at 110 decibels, like a silent 110 decibels is working because I've got a predictable pattern and order. So I think it's like you step back from the tactic to sort of think, what's the environment in which I'm looking for a tactic, and what's the strategy I'm trying to counter? And I think if what you're encountering is noise, what's a creative approach to creating not necessarily order, but literally creating information, which is, information is always in a tension between complete predictability and complete randomness. Like information's always, like a little eddy in between those things. And it's like trying to create that in what's turned out to be like an incredibly noisy media environment might be more commonly the strategy at the moment.
There's definitely a logic that kind of like a lot of like right-wing tactics kind of use where it's kind of like a combination of both noise and distraction. So like immediately when you try to kind of say like, no, that's not correct, the actual statistic is this, then they'll move the point. So it's this constant kind of shifting of kind of argumentation through distraction.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's God, what was his name? But it really is like flood the zone with shit. So like there's like all the stuff I'm reading on through my devices is actually accurate and true. It's just there's so much of it I can't tell which. So you just make the environment so noisy. Whereas the old model of the newspaper or broadcast media was this channeling that down to a very manageable stream of information. That system had its problems, but at least it gave you a kind of consensus version of reality. That's not really there anymore. So how you kind of create little islands of that on a local and particular scale, like that sort of becomes the art in a way.
Can I ask another question? I have a microphone, so I can.
I think we have one at the back first, though.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to know if you can tell us a little bit more about this worst thing that you put in the question. It's like, for me, it's somehow relative. The worst is for whom, in which moment of history, or how you know, I'm thinking like this Nietzschean question about wrong and right, and how it depends on how you tell the history of these words would change.
I may be the last living Nietzschean Marxist, you know, it was a thing some decades ago. It's worse because it's going to destroy the planet faster. Like it's just massively accelerated the rate at which the planet becomes unlivable. So that one to me is, you know, that layer determines all the others. My personal life's been fucking great, you know, like I'm living a good life through the travel I can do and the work I can do, but I think the planetary cost of this mode of production is massively unsustainable.
But could it be like just a transition, a necessary transition, where something better and just is like...
Yeah, that's sort of the Benjamin Bratton approach, that actually you got to accelerate it so that this version of the stack can build the next one. And it's like, that seems theological to me. I don't know if accelerating this gets us anywhere but more of it. And drives us to more volatility quicker. So yeah, I'm not optimistic about that. But yeah, that's always like the content warning I have to give. I don't do hope. You know, it's like get Franco Berardi. You know, it's like I always find him really inspiring. I'm like, no, Franco, it's terrible. It's worse. It's so fucked. You know, but I think I don't trust people whose politics is based on hope because it's fragile. I trust people who've seen the worst and keep going. You know, as Beckett says, I can't go on, I'll go on. Like that to me is what's real. So, but if that's the space you want to inhabit emotionally, I'm all for it. Yeah, it's just not me. It's bad. But I think there's people listening. So if you put your hand up again.
No. I don't like this to talk like this.
Please use it because I think people rely on the translation of things.
Maybe this is like me thinking about is an idea that I have. It just maybe doesn't make any sense, and I don't know if I don't need a word for the worst thing that I understand what you see, and I think all of us see different things, but. When I listen to people that maybe are not politicized, using the word that you use also, extractivism, I felt like capitalism seems soft when I use extractivism. Can it be like that? Because extractivism, it can be like Kenya people talking about lithium, or people in Covas do Barroso, or pinkwashing is extractivism for me also, no? So is extractivism part of capitalism? It's worse, is the same, is I don't know, it's a thing that when I use now extractivism, I think I use it because I want to say something harder, and maybe it's not, I don't know.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's all of the layers of it are connected. So at the top level, sort of surveillance and control of the value chain through information still requires a level of like the manufacturing of the artifacts of everyday life and the machine tools and all that. It's far less sort of profitable and difficult business to be in lots of ways. But then underneath that is extraction, is coal mines and bauxite mines and lithium mines and the oil industry, and it's also children wandering around with buckets collecting coltan in the Congo. It's also a global system of agriculture that sort of often has de-skilled labor and connected it to a plantation system. So that's the worst labor there is, and beneath that is the sort of like non-labor survival on the detritus that's left after extraction does its work, But the thing is, the extraction only happens because there's like a global system that's able to map everything as quantifiable resources, or thinks it can, and set it all in motion. And then there's a whole second information sphere. That's what actual derivative markets do, right? Is map out every other possible future for every other combination of all those resources, all fluctuating in real time, driving, supply chains, which are then sort of extracting, the bottom of the earth. So you have to sort of like think the whole thing together. But also is it can't go on, Like it won't last all that much longer in its current form. Well, it's talking up more of a downer than I thought it would. I was like,
No, but I think it's so. Personally, I think it's so useful because really, what you've like charted out here for us is basically kind of like the infrastructure of like what is currently happening, the moment that we're currently living in, and the way that power is actually kind of actively moving towards us, effectively, technically. I think this is very, very useful. And even though you might say like, oh, it's a downer, but actually, it's not. It's like the beginning of a strategy or a beginning of a tactic, right?
Yeah, and I'm actually from coal country in Australia, and an area 18 times the size of Sydney has just been designated as available for new mining leases, and you just sort of think, this is all madness. Like, that's, if you actually extract that and export it, like, my hometown is the world's biggest coal port, so we're just killing the planet faster than everybody else. Go Newcastle.
Go for you.
Go Knights, So, how do you get out of that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have anything useful in Ireland to help that. Like, we just got a little bit of gas. That's it.
And resource really does turn out to be a curse. You're kind of lucky not to have it in a way. But,
yeah, unfortunately.
Australian politics is all about mining.
Yeah, Irish politics is all about like conning Americans to spend money in Ireland.
I've never been there. Someone should invite me.
I'll invite you, no problem. Come on.
Ireland, yeah.
I can pick you up from the airport.
Yeah,
in my electric car.
Yeah. Go do my James Joyce pilgrimage and all that, Yeah.
I can show you Nora O'Murchú's house because that's actually where I'm in my hometown. And
my God.
Also my friend is actually the museum manager there, so you can get a personal guided tour.
Yeah.
Let's continue.
Sorry, some deep Anglophone art nonsense there.
Yes. But, I think maybe, do we have any more last remaining questions? Because I know, correct me if I'm wrong, we have more time? It's okay. Okay, we can keep going.
It's
okay.
Time. If anyone's got any thoughts out there?
Yeah.
Over second row over here. Mic is on its way.
I'd just like to return to what you said earlier about the force of AI into everything, whether it should be there or not, and it really shouldn't be almost anywhere, so-called AI, as having a political dimension rather than a business case. I just wanted to ask you what you think about that and how it might affect people's ability to come up with tactics of resistance and protest to this new order of I guess like information decay and things not being trustworthy or factual, or even people being able to agree on a consensus reality, along with the if people are dependent on asking AI for answers to everything, losing their own ability to, I guess, like find a sort of meta-analysis of things in the world, to contextualize thought, to come up with like connections between ideas, and to just like synthesize what they're thinking. So is this something that is also part of that political project? Maybe it's a way of cognitive de-skilling and just making people too stupid to fight back.
And de-skilling is a good word for it. Thank you, Harry Braverman, who thought about that in the industrial workplace, and how automation in the industrial workplace, David Noble also wrote about this, industrialization or mechanization of the industrial workplace wasn't always about efficiency. It was often about taking control away from workers. But this left a lot of control of information labor in the hands of us. I imagine most of us do work like that, right? So how do you take that control away is sort of the movement we're in. And the first thing is you have to make the work measurable. Like, how do you quantify it? Because if you can quantify it, you can measure it and make it more efficient. So then you need to standardize it. So how do we standardize what all of the information outputs are supposed to be and what they're supposed to look like? Yeah, we got used to industrially made manufactured articles. We're supposed to get used to industrially made manufactured information. It's sort of where we are. But a lot of people at the moment kind of hate it and are aware of what's going on, you know? Like, as Stuart Hall says, people are not cultural dopes. Like, people have the capacity to figure it out. And how do you tap into that and organise that and find ways to push back against that? Anybody else work in education? I'm in education. Yeah, and there's all of this fucking ed tech that we're now supposed to use that is under surveillance and is maximally extractive. The one my university uses got hacked just yesterday and the whole thing fell apart. It's like, great. So even you know, even the level of teaching, how do you encourage people to, like stretch their ability to use information tools in a way that retains their autonomy, lets them develop a skill, gives them the capacity to make their own judgments about things. I think that's sort of crucial work at the moment. Which is why in my courses I do oral exams. It's like you might have phoned in the paper and you might be getting chat for free now. It won't be, yeah? So I thought, how do you get people used to outsourcing quote-unquote intelligence so that you can meter it, is the two-step process. And we've been through this before, right? It's free to build the market and then you have to rent your own brain back. Great. So to see it coming. I will say I had this next book, The Passenger, mostly done, and just as an experiment, I asked Chat to write the last chapter for me, and I was really fascinated by the output at first. And then I still have those outputs, but they're separate from the computer because I feel it's contaminating in some way. Like, you know, and it actually wrote me in terms of all of my cliches. I'm like, I do that too much, and oh God, I write sentences like that. Like it was just more of the same. Like and you know, as a writer, and you know, look, my art is writer. You know, my religion is writer. My nationality is writer. My gender is actually writer. You know, it's the core of me. And what matters to me as a writer is that the body of work I produce will be finite. This is what I spent my life doing. And what I love about artists is when you see that, you spent your life making that. And it's finite. It will end, yeah? Fucking chat never ends. It'll never die. It's always there. It's not art, like by definition. So like art is connected to mortality. And that shit's just not. So I don't care if it even looks good or sounds good. I thought at first I'd take a couple of good sentences out of what Chat wrote. I'm like, nah. I actually did that in a Hacker Manifesto, like a very primitive Markov chain computer program wrote some sentences based on my own texts, and I got a sentence out of it and stuck it in a book 25 years ago. But now I'm like, just absolutely fucking not. Like every sentence in everything, every book I write will have been written and rewritten 20 times, yeah, by this life. And not just me, that's what I appreciate about any artist's work, if there's a body of work and your life was committed to that. And that to me is glorious, almost sacred. And I'm gonna go down with that ship.
Oh, there's something.
We have a person in the pink shirt.
Hello? Okay.
Hi.
So, we're talking just now about artificial intelligence, and I'm not a fan of Gen AI, especially, but I think there's also I think in a way there's too much an exaggeration to one side that is, yeah, there's all these technical or techno-fascist people that are with cloud models of AI or so-called AI. But there's also, and this is everywhere, and we see it everywhere, and it's being pushed towards us by everything in all facets of life. But at least I think there's also something to be said about learning how this so-called AI works. Not you don't have, you have local models. You can run it on your computer. Don't need to use things that are online, and you don't need to feed that machine more. And so what's your opinion about this? Like, you don't need to hate AI because we can have like studies on genetics and so on because of it, or cancer research that actually works. But we need to understand that there's a techno-fascist world that's leading that into a search for their own interests, but we need to learn how to fight it. And I believe, and I want to hear your opinion about it, that if we actually learn more about it, we can also lose our dependency on those solutions and see how they are bad for everything, creativity, environment, and so on. But we actually need to learn more about them, not trying to take them out of, yes, but not in the sense that is without knowing what they are able to do.
Yeah, and the thing about, it's why I talk about so-called AI, because what we're being sold is large language models based on the scraped databases. And for every technology, there are all these paths not taken of what else it could have been and done. The path that was chosen is one that relied on truly massive quantities of compute, which is why we're building data centers to the end of time. Could it have been something else? And is it actually a family of technologies that all do different things? And in some cases, yeah, it might be, I don't know how many ways there are you could possibly fold a protein, but there's parameters to the logic of how the chemistry of what you're trying to fold works. So you can build a model that could go through every permutation of that, but it would be based on real data. Yeah, it would be based on data that has some reliability and is built out of a science that has an error correction system, which is peer review, right? So where do you build in those systems of kind of information hygiene, and when do they not exist? Is, I think, sort of more the question there. I mean, it's not AI, but climate science is a massively computation-based science, yeah? And it's where the models matter much more than the facts, because climate models are based on weather data, and climate's not weather. And the climate data is very, you have data series that aren't compatible, and people change the measurement system. But physics gives you a model that lets you actually reprocess the data and clean it up, build models. So we kind of have some idea of what the climate of the planet's been for 6 billion years and what the likely outcomes of our current actions are, and they all point in the same direction. So it's like a massively computation-based science that gets a result, because even though the data you put into it isn't entirely clean, you've got a model based in a physical reality that lets you negotiate between the data and the model and give you outputs and ways of arguing about which of those are more reliable in a context of a science where there's multiple funding sources and people driven by different agendas. So, like that's how you use, information technology to try to produce information that's useful. What's happening with so-called AI large language models is not that at all. And it's not even really a question of the techniques, it's a question of the design of what it's supposed to do, which is extract value, yeah? How do you extract sign value out of sense value is what that model's all about. And so it, what it produces has no necessary relation to reality or the possible at all. The most fun thing about when I used Chat and Claude wrote a chapter for me is a lot of the references were made up that it used. We all know that one. It made up references that I had allegedly written. And I'm also like, that was a damn good book title. I wish I'd thought of that, but no, it's off limits. So yeah, it's not, it's a simulation of knowledge. It's not knowledge.
I have a comment on that. I'm a physicist, and it was correct a few months ago, but I think recently, like maybe 3 months from January, if I use ChatGPT, it works more or less like a postdoc. It can actually generate new knowledge from what it has there. I don't know. But it can definitely calculate new things and produce new knowledge from a discussion with me. Of course, there is my mind there, but and it's not generating like fake references anymore. It's at least if you pay for it, So it's kind of scary in some sense, and I think we're gonna need to rethink what they are doing, because in math and in physics, I saw that there are mathematicians also discovering that they can actually produce new results, and for me it's quite fast. It really works like a very good postdoc. So it's not basic knowledge, really.
But it's a situation where there's a logical relation between the components that you put in play, whereas natural language is not like that, as we all know. But the thing is, who ends up owning and controlling that? When if it's like a postdoc, it's going to make those obsolete. So then who then becomes physicists in 20 years? Because nobody got a postdoc because everybody used the AI instead. And guess what? It's not cheap anymore. Because we know what happened with academic journals. Somebody got a monopoly on that. And then the key journals you have to read are all insanely expensive. So it's like just being a little cautious about the short-term benefit, given that you're up against people who actually do think long-term about investments in how you produce anti-markets. Like at the top level, this is not a market economy, it's an anti-market economy designed to produce non-markets where you get to set the price, and that's where this heads. Shout out to Brodel for the anti-market thing, and Manuel de Landa, who made it a key concept. Well, the good news is we can have a break. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, McKenzie.
Thank you, Nora.
It's been amazing.
Thank you, Index, for having me.